All right, on with more of the suspects. So we left off after going through Lucy Harris, and then Flanders Drake, or that was one of his brothers? Yeah, Flanders Drake, the son-in-law, a very particular friend, and now we're on to the money diggers. The money diggers, as we saw in the previous chapter, had particular reason to take interest in the book translated from the plates and to undermine its success. Their sense of entitlement to the plates made the book, derived from it, a natural object of their curiosity and, in some cases, their ire. See Mormonism number 2. Lest one of the diggers, at least one of the diggers, is known to have opposed the book quite actively, and quite actively the following year, and to have still taken action against it as late as 1833. Early in 1829, several months after the manuscript disappeared, Joseph's former fellow treasure seeker, Peter Ingersoll, was willing to perjure himself in order to stop the translation and publication of the Book of Mormon and get Joseph jailed. See Lucy's book for that reference. The occasion for Ingersoll's perjury was a lawsuit against the prophet. Though Martin refused to join in on the suit against Joseph, his wife Lucy was, not surprisingly, quite willing. In her memoir, Lucy Mack Smith recounted some of the court proceedings as rehearsed to her. Quote, "The witnesses, being duly sworn, the first arose and testified that Joseph Smith told him that the box which he had contained nothing but sand, and he, Joseph Smith, said it was gold to deceive the people. The second witness swore that Joseph Smith had told him that it was nothing but a box of lead, and he was determined to use it as he saw fit. Third witness declared that he once inquired of Joseph Smith what he had in that box, and Joseph Smith told him that there was nothing at all in that box, saying that he had made fools of the whole of them, and all he wanted was to get Martin Harris's money away from him, and that he, witness, was knowing to the fact that Joseph Smith had, by his persuasion, already got $200 or $300. Unquote. This testimony, particularly of that of the first witness, should be compared to the 1833 affidavit sworn by Ingersoll regarding Joseph Smith. Quote, "He made me his confidant." It was supposed to be confidant, but that's how he wrote it, was confident, S-I-C. That's how they wrote back then. So he made me his confidant. One day he came and greeted me with a joyful countenance. Upon asking the cause of his unusual happiness, he replied in the following language. "As I was passing yesterday across the woods after a heavy shower of rain, I found in a hollow some beautiful white sand that had been washed up by the water. I took off my frock and tied up several quarts of it, and then went home. On my entering the house, I found the family at the table eating dinner. They were all anxious to know the contents of my frock. At that moment, I happened to think of what I had heard about the history found in Canada, called the Golden Bible. So I very gravely told them it was the Golden Bible. To my surprise, they were credulous enough to believe what I said. Accordingly, I told them that I had received a commandment to let no one see it, for, says I, no man can see it with the naked eye and live. However, I offered to take out the book and show it to them, but they refused to see it, and left the room. Now, said Joe, I have got the damned fools fixed, and will carry out the fun. Notwithstanding, he told me he had no such book, and believed there was never any such book, yet he told me that he actually went to Willard Chase to get him to make a chest, in which he might deposit his Golden Bible. But as Chase would not do it, he made a box himself of clapboards and put it into a pillowcase, and allowed people only to lift it and feel it through the case." Peter Ingersoll's statement, 1833, in Ever How Mormonism Unveiled. Ingersoll's distinctive claim that Joseph Smith deceived others by palming off a box of sand as a box containing the golden plates seems to identify him with the witnesses making a similar claim in the 1829 trial. However, while Ingersoll alleged that Joseph had spontaneously concocted the golden plates story to fool his family about what was in the bag of white sand, testimony from the Smiths and others show that Joseph described his quest for the plates over a period of 4 years before he ever claimed to take possession of them. This leaves Ingersoll's affidavit either, at minimum, a gross misremembering of what Joseph allegedly told him, or a deliberate act of perjury. Though the identities of Ingersoll's fellow witnesses is not yet clear, they were likely fellow money diggers who would have shared his enmity towards Joseph and been able to plausibly claim he had confided with them about the treasure he claimed to have found. Having worked together in searching treasure in the dark of the night, and later conspired with one another to steal the plates, Ingersoll and his collaborators could have easily put together a small conspiracy to put Joseph in jail, and thus get the revenge they sought, by deceiving others in order to discredit and avenge themselves on a presumed deceiver. Ingersoll and his companions fell under the condemnation pronounced by Joseph's revelation on the manuscript thieves. Verily, verily, I say unto you, woe be unto him that lieth to deceive, because he supposeth that another lieth to deceive. For such are not exempt from the justice of God. That's Doctrine and Covenants 10:28. Furthermore, the Revelation's wicked men who stole the manuscript in anger and conspired to destroy his work evoked the angel's warning about wicked men among the money diggers who would try to steal the plates. It also paralleled the money diggers in their secretiveness, describing them as men who loved darkness rather than light, because darkness cloaked their evil doing. Doctrine and Covenants 10:21. Joseph Smith added this description of the conspirators in a revelatory expansion to the revelation in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. Similarly, money diggers usually hid their digging activities under the cover of night to keep the location of their treasure secret. For the wicked men of the angel's warning to be also the wicked men of the revelation would require only that they explain their conspiracies of theft against the book of plates to include the book taken from the plates. Doctrine and Covenants 10 further links the conspirators to the money diggers when it implicitly groups Martin with the conspiring wicked men by calling him a wicked man, because he has sought to take away the things wherewith you have been entrusted, and he has also sought to destroy your gift. However, given Martin's continued support of Joseph and selection to be one of the witnesses of the golden plates, it seems unlikely that the revelation was intended to cast Martin as a co-conspirator of the theft. Rather, Martin seems to be classed with the wicked men who attempted to dispossess Joseph of the plates and other sacred things because his misdeeds facilitated theirs. Regardless whether he intended to help the conspirators, he did. Adding to the suspicion of the money diggers being connected to the manuscript theft, Martin himself had personal connections with these men. In his 1859 interview with Joel Tiffany, Martin related various stories he had heard from these money diggers that suggested a close association with several of these men. Quote, "These things were told to me in confidence and told by different ones, and their stories agreed," unquote. That comes from Mormonism, volume number 2. Judging from his further comments, the money digger to whom Martin was closest was Samuel Lawrence, to whom Martin attributed stories about the diggers' remarkable experiences. Martin's involvement with the money diggers in general, and Lawrence in particular, may have even passed beyond mere conversation about treasure quests and into actual spade work. Oljensen, who knew Martin during his later years in Utah, recalled his account of a dig in the hill Cumorah in the weeks after Joseph obtained the plates. Quote, I will tell you a wonderful thing that happened. Sorry, they've taken certain words and crossed them out. So, for example, I will tell you is crossed out. So it's, I will tell you a wonderful thing. So you'll hear me pause, and then I'll read on. So I will tell you that, a wonderful thing that happened after Joseph had found the plates. 3 of us took a notion to take some sort of tools to go to the hill and hunt for some more boxes or gold or something. And indeed, we found a stone box. We got excited, probably meaning quite excited, about it, and dug quite carefully around it. We were ready to take it up, but behold, by some unseen power, it slipped and it slipped back into the hill. We stood there and looked at it. One of us took a crowbar and tried to drive it through the lid to hold it, but it glanced off and only broke one corner off the box. Sometime that box will be found, and you'll see the corner broken off. Then you will know I've told you the truth. While Jensen could have conflated a dig that Martin had merely heard about with one he'd participated in, Martin was positioned to finance such a dig, and as well as acquainted with several of Palmyra's area's active money diggers, particularly Samuel Lawrence, making his involvement entirely plausible. Some footnotes I need to get to. In his 1859 interview with Joel Tiffany, Martin Harris did not acknowledge having encountered such a slippery treasure while digging himself, but recounted hearing about it from the money diggers. It was reported by these money diggers that they had found boxes, but before they could secure them, they would sink into the earth. Interesting. Ole A. Jensen, testimony of Martin Harris, one of the witnesses of the Book of Mormon, and Vogel. Brigham Young described this, or a very similar dig, as it had been recounted to him by Porter Rockwell, the son of Manchester money digger Orrin Rockwell. Brigham Young, June 17, 1877, Journal of Discourses. Never heard of, we were bringing out a box, but then it slipped back into the hill, and so we didn't get it out. I mean, it's like, okay, interesting. So continuing with the text. And just as Martin was well positioned to finance a dig, Lawrence, who was reputed to be a seer in his own right, and to whom Joseph had reportedly shown the site on the hill where he had found the stone box, was well positioned to lead one. See Knight's Manuscript of the History of Joseph for that. By keeping such company and not breaking off these connections after an angel warned of conniving persons among them, Martin risked letting would-be thieves with a vendetta against Joseph into his confidence and home. Samuel Lawrence. It is quite likely among the money diggers, and particularly in the person of Samuel Lawrence, that we will find Martin's very particular friend, who arrived at his door soon after he returned home with the manuscript, and for whom he eagerly wrested the manuscript from its bonds of lock and key and of covenant obligation. Beyond his helping lead the efforts to steal the gold plates from Joseph, Lawrence proved willing to avenge himself for real or imagined injury by taking another person's property. On April 17, 1833, 3 years after the publication of the Book of Mormon, Lawrence was indicted for fraudulently secreting property. Find that in Oyer and Timmer Minutes, 1824 to 1845. The events behind the fragmentary court record of the incident, as reconstructed by the late Rich Troll, are as follows. Samuel Lawrence, an agent for his brother-in-law Abner Cole's Rochester newspaper, the Liberal Advocate, formerly the Palmyra Reflector, refused to deliver copies of the newspaper to a subscriber against whom he apparently had a vendetta, perhaps even pocketing the subscription money. See Rich Troll, Samuel Tyler Lawrence, a significant figure in Joseph Smith's Palmyra past. Around this time, Lawrence's employment with the Liberal Advocate was terminated, and a few months later he was indicted on the subscriber's charge of theft. See Wayne County, New York, court record, April 17, 1833. This incident, combined with Lawrence's belief that Joseph had wronged him in withholding his rightful share of Cumorah's treasure, and that he was justified in trying to steal the plates, adds plausibility to Lawrence feeling similarly justified in secreting the manuscript. Samuel Lawrence had clear motive, a direct connection with both Martin Harris and the Book of Plates, and a known instance in the few years following the manuscript theft of taking or withholding property illegally in order to get what he believed was due to him, or to exact revenge when he did not. He fits the profile of the thieves sketched in the near contemporaneous revelation, almost certainly belongs in a set of persons whom the victim Joseph Smith believed had taken the manuscript, the unauthorized viewers, and makes an identifiable candidate for Martin's very particular friend, who, whether by accident or by stratagem, compromised the manuscript's security and likely facilitated its theft. Interesting. So, for the next section here, I was just thinking about how I wonder how prevalent the same attitudes of these type of men, because, I mean, if you think about it, that means at least two of the acquaintances, if not more, of Martin Harris were of not good character. It means that his son-in-law, who was later brought up on charges of theft with his family, weren't of good character. The money digger group, as a group, wasn't of great character, and specifically Samuel Lawrence, not of good character, although pocketing fraudulently the subscriber's money to a newspaper seems a little less than the son-in-law, who was kind of like being a con man and took hundreds of dollars, but yeah. It's interesting that the money diggers would be the ones who would perjure themselves to avenge themselves of Joseph Smith. So yeah, no, it's kind of interesting that it is understandable that, like, I can cognitively understand why someone would lie and cheat and etc. because of such feelings. What I'm trying to figure out is how prevalent was an attitude like that among the frontiers people of the 1800s. Because I know people talk big around a table, and then there are times where you talk big enough, long enough, you finally do something about it, either something stupid, especially over alcohol. So I'm just wondering, how many times will people, like, not do the right thing in order that they feel like they get their justice that they deserve back then? Or was it really just certain groups of people? And how different is it from today? How many people still today in their groups are like, wow, I'm going to get my own? You know, I can see that in very particular groups, like biker gangs and anyone who's kind of, I don't know if you've ever heard my conversation with Rinda about honor-based societies. Like the Japanese were a very big honor society, hence there was, a lot of emphasis on taking your life if you did something stupid or wrong, or if you can't take it. And it's still, unfortunately, prevalent in Japan, more than it, I think, ought to be, but that's my personal opinion. But how there's other ones that are like, there's a book that was suggested to me by Nathan called Becoming a Barbarian, that talks about, having your in-group and other things like that, and describing how you have each other's backs, that despite society going astray, because it was written kind of around 2008-ish, and so even when society's going bonkers, that you have each other's backs. And that's kind of the idea about becoming a barbarian. But it also led me to discussions and resources about the idea that when you have a highly structured society based specifically on honor, that you basically, if someone wrongs you, and specifically your honor, like they call you a coward, or they repute your honor in some way, you go out and you settle things with them, that you don't let it stand. It's very different from how I perceive a lot of things should and can work. And because I'm not really in touch with big honor societies or subgroups that are honor-based, I mean, besides some basic minor, hey, if you think about it, the Boy Scouts and having a Boy Scout attitude, that's based in certain types of honor. Religiously, you want to honor your father and mother, and you want to honor the commandments. But at the same time, we're not going out and doing religious killings for, perceived slights against the church or things like that. It's just like way different than being so based in an honor code that you're willing to go out and do something about it. So, I don't know. It's just the idea of these guys perjuring themselves and lying because they feel like they've been wronged or that they wanted money and they were greedy. I mean, in some ways, it's like, how much of this is human nature? How much is it based on living in a subgroup or main group that honors, that focuses on honor or getting their own kind of ideals? It's kind of an interesting rabbit hole to dive into. I don't have any answers. It's just something that kind of like, something to think about. The revelatory explanation for the manuscript loss. Joseph Smith's revelation on the stolen manuscript, published as Doctrine and Covenants 10, explains its theft on both historical and theological levels. Satan inspired wicked men to take the Book of Mormon manuscript and alter its text to produce contradictions that would impugn Joseph Smith's ability as a translator. And God allowed this theft, but had foreseen it and used it providentially, holding in reserve a backup record that would more than fill the gap left by the corrupted text. This explanation, held by believers in the Book of Mormon consistently since the revelation was given, has often been an object of criticism by non-believers who see it as a transparent dodge to avoid having to reproduce the lost pages. Support for the Revelation's explanation will almost certainly continue to be a matter of faith and not of historical analysis. The tools of history are ill-suited to answering questions like, were those who stole the Book of Mormon manuscript inspired by Satan to discredit the book? Or was the theft foreseen by God and factored into his plan for the book? It is beyond the realm of historical scholarship to prove or disprove the explanation given by the revelation for the manuscript loss. However, it is within the scope of scholarship to assess why those involved in the emergence of the Book of Mormon found this explanation quite believable. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because trying to, depending on journals and other things, you could probably figure out some people's thoughts or reasonings, but what's not recorded, like, were they inspired by Satan? I mean, even if they were inspired by Satan, I don't think anyone would sit there and think, here, I was inspired by Satan. That's probably not going to be it. Anyway, the revelatory explanation of the manuscript lost was believable to its earliest audience, those assisting Joseph Smith in bringing forth the Book of Mormon, because this explanation fit comfortably within the context of surrounding events. The revelation states that the translation manuscript had been taken by a group of wicked men, acting in conspiratorial secrecy, Doctrine and Covenants 10:8, and that these individuals were motivated to prevent the publication of the Book of Mormon and harm and discredit its translator, verse 19, and that they would do so by doctoring the translated text, likely by introducing variations while copying it, so the two versions would contradict. That's verses 10 through 18. Those supporting Joseph Smith in protecting, translating, and publishing the Book of Mormon would have also been unsurprised by the idea of conspirators taking the translation manuscript in order to introduce contradictions and thereby discredit it. Lucy Harris and Flanders Dyke had conspired to steal the character manuscript, copy it, and use the copy to discredit Joseph's claims. Furthermore, those who pressed Martin to sue Joseph in March of 1829 portrayed Joseph as self-contradictory and aimed to reveal his deception in claiming to possess the plates and being able to translate them. See Testimony of Martin Harris, 1870. Altogether, the revelation said nothing that would have seemed unusual or surprising. The one novel explanation in the revelation is that of the conspirators hoping to discredit Joseph by producing a variant copy that would make it appear that Joseph was unable to reproduce the same translation. However, even this does not greatly diverge from the earlier conspiracy of discrediting the Book of Mormon by copying the character transcript. This new element in the revelation would have made particular sense to the early believers in the light of the Book of Mormon theology of sealing up sacred records. As explained in chapter 2, a sacred text that has been sealed up was in the care of God and angels, and was thus incorruptible so long as the seal remained in force. But a sacred text that passed through impure hands was tainted, thereafter falling under the suspicion that it had been corrupted. Nephi's panoramic vision of human history showed him that some records were sealed up to come forth in their purity. But the Bible, in passing through the hands of the great and abominable church built by the devil, was altered, and many plain and precious things taken from it. That's 1 Nephi 13, 26 through 28, chapter 14, verses 23 through 26 as well. Therefore, what had happened to the initial Book of Mormon manuscript was the opposite of sealing up. Rather than sealing up the translated pages unto the care of God, who would protect them and keep them pure, Joseph had unwittingly delivered them up, yea, that which was sacred unto wickedness, into the hands of wicked men who were inspired by Satan to corrupt the scriptural text. The suspicion that the sacred text could have been corrupted by passing through the hands of the wicked would have arisen naturally from the theology and practice of sealing scriptural records described in the Book of Mormon. What the revelation did was to confirm this suspicion and instruct that, because of the modification of the sacred text, Joseph should not retranslate the stolen pages, narrowing the mystery. Although the mystery of the missing Book of Mormon manuscript cannot, at this time, be definitively solved, those who actively opposed the Book of Mormon at the time of the theft and had plausible means to carry it out can be identified. Outside the improbable event that the manuscript was stolen by enemies to the Book of Mormon, who are largely invisible and in historical record, those complicit in the manuscript theft likely include one or more of the persons discussed above. If we cannot yet identify the thief or thieves, we can at least narrow the probable suspects to two relatively small groups: Harris family insiders and Palmyra area money diggers. Nice. Next is chapter 5, the long blue lost manuscript. Oh, interesting. I have never heard of this. Cool. Interesting. I will... Okay, well, I'll have to... Sorry, I was reading ahead a little. But, the long blue lost manuscript. Huh. I wonder if he's about to describe... I haven't heard of it, but if it was written on blue paper, that would be cool. Anyway. I'll find out tomorrow, I'm sure. I'm just, again, I'm fascinated by the idea of... because we see that in a lot of Westerns, honestly, the idea of the frontiersman type of justice, the frontiersman type of, well, I if I'm not going to be given justice, I'm going to go out and get it myself, kind of thing. And vigilantism in itself, I think, comes from a breakdown of being able to rely on a societal recourse for justice. Because, I mean, if you live in a place where justice can't be served because, well, for example, like if you're on the frontier, depending on the stage of frontierism that it's in, there just may not be any sheriff or anything like that around, or if they are, it could be, days away, and therefore the culprit would have no way of being caught if you went and fetched the proper law representative. Then you have a stage where maybe they're around or in town, but there's so few people that any larger amount of wicked people, such as groups who were ranch hands, just becoming volatile, and that's where you get a lot of really good Western stories of the lone sheriff, or maybe a sheriff and deputy in a small posse taking on the big, rustler family, or the gang of outlaws that cause problems. It's that's where you get a lot of really good Western stories. But at the same time, I'm sitting here thinking, what if you had someone who's like a marshal, who, yeah, he's there to enforce law, but it's in a way to, I don't know how in depth the marshal system worked on the frontier, because to me, I'm sitting here thinking of examples I've seen in popular culture, both video games and movies, where the marshal is kind of, he's a lawman, but he's a lawman more for the train companies and other things. I've often wondered if that was ever really a thing or not. And so they don't have the manpower nor the concern, because their main employer is the train company. So if it doesn't involve the train company, they don't really care. I wonder if there's something like that would, or just a failure of, maybe you do have a sheriff, but he's a yellow-bellied coward, and so, how are you going to take justice in your own hand? Because you can't, if the law won't go out and arrest the person who's done you wrong, perceived or otherwise. But the weird thing is that, like, here I'm thinking of the West as in, like, very frontier, and how, between, God, I'm just thinking about how you have California, which, once the United States, well, even before the United States was taken care of, it was built up by the Spanish. But as soon as the Americans took over, and we were building up places like San Francisco and San Diego and things like that, and that became like the center of the West on the West Coast. And then you had the East Coast coming, and you had this middle band between, like, you got like Texas and Arizona and New Mexico and Utah and Colorado and and Idaho and Montana and Wyoming. Like, that to me is the traditional West. Like, I know California is definitely the West in a lot of Western shows, but to me, just because I grew up on Utah, I'm like, the central U.S., the church corridor, north and south from Utah, of Deseret and what we tried to claim. and just that to me is like the West traditionally, whereas California is like, yeah, it's the West, but it's kind of this burgeoning thing that goes on to be a pioneer in a lot of stuff, like aviation and rockets and other stuff. It becomes like, California is a really unique place. I really do love California for all the terrible governmental stuff that happens in California. There's a lot to be said for its history and innovation and its natural resources and its national parks, and just so much about it is way, way cool. The only problem is its government, which is just so, so horrible. But, yeah, but I sit here and think about, well, during Joseph Smith's time, the West and the frontier was mostly like Missouri, like the Great Plains. Like, it's funny to me that, Jackson County, Missouri was on the edge of the frontier, where you got these plains people and stuff, and that migration west with Brigham Young to settle in Utah, it was a big deal. I mean, I know people were going to Oregon and and things. I mean, that's why they followed a lot along the Oregon Trail. But it's always weird to me to think of the middle part of the country where, basically around the Mississippi, and especially just west of the Mississippi, was kind of the frontier. And that you'd have this frontier justice kind of thing, and if you can call it that, mob rule. Because, I mean, you have later incidents where the what is it, the Morning and Evening Star, the church-owned press that was destroyed, that they, right before the Hans Mill Massacre, during the Hans Mill Massacre, and also them trying to destroy the publication of the Doctrine and Covenants, or Book of Commandments at the time. It's just like, they destroyed a printing press. And nobody got up in arms about the church having their printing press destroyed. But as soon as it was convenient, as soon as it was able to be used as a cudgel against the church, because when Joseph Smith destroyed the printing press that was going to cause them such trouble, which they had lived through in Missouri, and they're like, tried to make it official, and it's like, this was done to us, and this is obviously something, our printing press was destroyed. We've been persecuted and thrown out, and here we have our own community, and here it is being threatened by a very real threat, and we're doing everything we can to make this as, legal and community possible, to say this is the proper recourse to destroy these printing presses. But no, that leads to that guy, he's against the First Amendment, and how heinous is it? It's just, the double standard is so glaring that here you have mob rule in Missouri that destroys the printing press, gets people killed, and just absolute tragedy of them being hunted, them being persecuted, them having to just leave Missouri to go a little back further east to Illinois, to then make a city out of a swamp on the banks of the Mississippi, and suffer there in Nauvoo. And then it's like, they're going to repeat the same things that happened in Missouri, and they knew it. They knew it was coming. And so they tried to stop it. And they're like, well, this was used against us. Maybe it's time that we do the same thing back. But no, instead, the double standard, in Missouri, it doesn't matter that your printing press was destroyed. It matters that the printing press that was against you was destroyed by you. It's just one of those things in history that so I sit here and go, if it was prevalent in certain times, or what, did it just come with the circumstances? Or was it prevalent through society in the frontier because they were lacking strong responsibility of law enforcement? And it just is, history is messy. And the enacting of law is also very messy. Because ultimately, despite all my blustering about frontierism, where the frontier is, the idea of vigilantism, despite all my blustering about that, even nowadays, when I consider how the law is upheld by some judges one way and by other judges a different way, that just upholding law in general and getting at least somewhat consistent is a huge benefit to any society. And that the more that you see these divergent uses of the law and judgment, that how much closer we are to mobs and chaos and vigilantism. Whether it's, again, some group somewhere is going to be pushed far enough. Like, I sit here and I'm grateful that the conservative side, after being pushed so hard for so long, has kept its head. It's easy to see how frothed up a liberal and woke side has to just being into mobs that have destroyed cities. And it's already been done. And yet, not really strong prosecution against it in those cities because of the unequal distribution of law, and it's just so when the law gets applied properly and consistently, how easy would it be for them to sit there and say, "Oh, we're being oppressed, and we should cause revolution," and they will go in the streets and burn things for revolution's sake, even though, I'm sorry, we were just applying the law properly. But that's not what they want, or that's not what they feel, and they will use violence to get their what's necessary. I just, anyways, we live in interesting times, and I hope, really hope. I think we're in for the downturn. I don't know how long, but we'll see. I think we're in for the downturn, and it's starting. Oh well. Love you, Dad. We'll see you.